This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means? It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Black Friday week starting November 21st.
So much of parenting is looking at your own stuff and trying to do differently while simultaneously healing your own parts of you. Doing that at the same time has been complicated and hard and beautiful and all of the things.
You're listening to Make Some Noise Podcast, episode number 639. Welcome to Make Some Noise Podcast, your guide for strategies, tools, and insight to empower yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Owen, global speaker, entrepreneur, life coach since 2007, and author of 3 books that have been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. Each week, I'll bring you a guest or a lesson that will help you maximize unshakable confidence, master resilience, and make some noise in your life. You ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am so glad that you are here. So today is an interview, and it's a little bit different than my normal interviews. If you might remember, episode 604, I had Hunter Clarke-Fields on, and she is a mindfulness expert who primarily focuses on parenting. And in that episode, we talked about more than parenting. We talked about mindfulness in general. So I'll pop that link in the show notes for you because it was great. And I was also on Hunter's podcast back in April, which is called Mindful Parenting Podcast, Raising Kind, Confident Kids Without Losing Your Cool. And it just was such a great episode. The interview that she did with me, I wanted to have it here for you in the feed. And again, it's slightly different because instead of me interviewing someone, which I usually bring you, this is an episode where she was interviewing me for her show. So she's going to be the host. You'll hear that. Again, it might sound a little bit different, but it was such a great episode. We talked about, I talked about how my own parenting has made me have to face a lot of things that were uncomfortable growing up. And it sort of, in a way, forced me to deal with those things. And many times, fortunately, heal from those things while simultaneously parenting. We even talk about roller derby, and we talk about shame and shame resilience. And I think that because it was just sort of the way things were done back when Gen X was being raised, and I think for a lot of millennials out there and in all generations really, where shame was a parenting strategy. And again, this is not to blame and shame our parents. It was just what they knew how to do, because many times it works. It usually always works. So I'm not going to do any fancy introductions or anything like that. I'll let you just listen to the interview. I do want to let you know that early bird registration is going to open for my next Daring Away retreat, which the retreat is going to be held early next year in 2025, but registration is going to open very soon. So if you're on the interest list, you are going to get those emails first. I'm not going to open it up to my email subscriber list. So if you're on that list, you won't hear about it until I offer it up first to these people who are on this particular list. And to get on that list, head on over to andreaowen.com/retreat. That's where you can read about the retreat, what it all entails, the takeaways, like what actually is involved in the curriculum. What will you walk away with having learned? It's all on there. And then you signing up for that list does not obligate you to sign up for the retreat. All it is that you will get first notification when I open up registration next week, which is not only going to have early bird pricing, it's also going to have a very special bonus that is some one-on-one time with me, some coaching from me that comes with the retreat that's not going to be offered to anyone else. So without further ado, here's the conversation where I was interviewed by Hunter Clarke-Fields.
Andrea, welcome to the Mindful Parenting Podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Hunter. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so I'm excited. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things. Like we're going to talk about shame resilience. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about the idea of giving Fs, or not giving Fs about things. But before we dive into this, I know you're a parent. We'd like to start this podcast by talking about kind of like, how were you raised and how was your childhood like? Is it different from the way you're raising your own kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine was pretty uneventful. I am the youngest of 5, but I have 4 older half siblings. So I am the only child. I was the only child of my parents. They brought 2 children each from their marriage. And so it was kind of like I had siblings, but didn't have siblings, and also had the benefit of growing up an only child and having all of my parents' love and attention, but also having like part-time siblings. So it was kind of a roller coaster in that regard, and was very lucky in a sense that, my parents were very affectionate and loving, and grew up working class really, and moved into middle class and in like the later 80s, which, I think is similar to a lot of people when the economy was booming back then. But it wasn't until much later, and I got into parenting myself, and some hard stuff happened as life happens, and also getting into personal development, that I realized that there wasn't a lot of emotional support. And growing up Gen X, not alone there.
My dad called it, he called it benign neglect.
Yeah, which is, yeah, that's a fair term. And it's not that it was abusive by any regard, but it does, it creates an impact when you're not taught or even acknowledged and seen for your feelings and emotions, and being dismissed, which was my experience. And so that's trying to answer the question around, how am I trying to parent differently than I was parented, which has been a roller coaster. Sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I get it wrong. I know when you were on my show, we talked about this too, that so much of parenting, I'm sure I'm not the first person to come on here and say this, so much of parenting is looking at your own stuff and trying to do differently while simultaneously healing your own parts of you that need reparenting. Doing that at the same time has been complicated and hard and beautiful and all of the things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I hear you. What's your relation? Are you good with your parents now? Have you guys talked about some of those things? Or
my dad passed away in 2016, and before he died, well, he also got sober when I was 18, which was a pivotal moment in, of course, his life, but also my life, and sort of paved the way for me to get sober when I was 36 or 37. I was a very high functioning alcoholic, knew what was in store for me if I kept drinking. So I quit before I, quote unquote, got ahead. And so my dad was starting to scratch the surface with his own personal growth journey. And he was, kind of late to the game, but I do think he did some work, and he and I had some really great conversations about it. It's been trickier with my mother, who's still here, and we have a complicated relationship. But we're working on it. I can say I'm working on it, but sometimes I'm not, met in the middle, and it can be heartbreaking.
Yeah. I know what you mean about the, I feel similarly, I guess, with my father. Like I feel like I've done like a lot of things. Like I've really tried to really understood like where he's come from, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of understanding. Definitely all of that has happened. And I've also like found myself at a place where I'm still like, but you're not, there's so much you could do,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. So it was funny because like last year recently, I was like angry, all over again. And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, these things, I guess they cycle through. I don't know.
Yeah. What's interesting to me, and I'm curious what your experience is that I have found, like, so I just turned 49 this week, and we never stop being a child to our parents.
Yeah.
Like, so there's still so many things that, I want my parents' approval. It pains me incredibly to know that their opinion of me isn't great, like that I disappointed them in some way, and it's like, these are the things I didn't think about like growing up. And I don't even know if my mom realizes that. It's like, you're still my mom. Like, I still need you to mother me, even though I'm so much older. So that's something I'm going to definitely take with me as my kids, grow into adulthood, that we never stop being in this relationship, in this parent-child relationship, even when they become adults.
Yeah, I guess that's definitely true for me, like wanting that approval, like I don't think my dad has read through my books. And that like kills me. I'm like, gosh, I get that they're such short books. I can't read these books.
Feeling like you're in fourth grade all over again. Yeah.
They're published by a publisher, Dad. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was looking at your bio and checking out some things about you. I want to know about roller derby and I want to know about Veronica Vane. That is really fascinating. How did you get involved in roller derby?
I was interested. There was a roller derby revival around 2004, 2005 in Austin, Texas, and I was watching from then. I had only seen roller derby in the 1970s, and the revival was definitely different from our mama's roller derby days. And I'm a big competitive sports person growing up. I was a high school cheerleader and nothing against that, but I just was so fascinated by the like the subculture of it and the athleticism of these women. And so I followed it for a while. And then we moved. I'm from San Diego. We moved from San Diego to the state of Utah. And they had a roller derby league in the city that we moved to. So I went to, it's called a bout. I went and I just was feeling the pull to try out, but I was so nervous. And so I went and talked to them when I bought my tickets.
I have to ask, were you, because I was like a really big roller skating kid. Like I did a lot of roller skating, had that 10-year-old roller skating birthday party.
Totally.
I have my knees still have scars from like tons of roller skating. Was that who you were?
100%.
Oh,
yes. And I think we're about the same age. So like, yes, roller skating. I had a roller skating belt that had a rainbow on it, like all of those things. And so I did rollerblading in the 90s too, but hadn't been on skates for a minute. And so, yeah. And it was honestly like one of those things where I imagined myself 10, 20, 30 years into the future and then seeing derby with like my daughter or something. And then just mentioning like, yeah, I always wanted to try out for that. And then if she asked me why I didn't, I would have to tell her that I was too intimidated, that I was scared, that I felt like I was too old. Because I was in like my late 30s by then.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have that conversation with her or anybody. And so I jumped and I tried out and I had to train and derby. You can choose a roller derby name. Like you don't have to. There's some controversy around it. I did end up choosing one. And Veronica Vane, many times our roller derby name is kind of our alter ego. And so that was mine. She, it was more important to her to look amazing out on the track than to skate well. And so that's how the name was born.
That's amazing. I love that. That's such a cool story of like your storytelling self, kind of like, you're kind of tapping into this storytelling self to help your experiential self who's in the moment like, oh God, this is super intimidating.
Yeah.
Kind of jump into something that's it's kind of like, sometimes I ask my daughter the question like, what are you going to regret more?
Yeah.
Going to this or not going to this. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a good question.
Yeah.
And for me, it was I would vastly regret not at least trying. And what I did for myself is I said like, and this is the same thing I do with my kids. Like when they don't want to go somewhere, I'll say like, okay, go for 10 minutes. And if you hate it, if it sucks, I'll just pick you up. Like you can leave. I mean, not with all things, but like school dances or, like sleepovers that they're kind of like, I don't know if I want to go and that type of thing. So that's what I did for myself. Like if I go and I hate it or I'm terrible at it or if everyone's mean to me, then I can leave. And none of those things happened. So I ended up staying until I got injured. It was like the most fun year of my life.
It sounds great.
It's amazing.
I still I pulled out my roller skates like a little while ago and I was like, wow, why we just roller skate around the neighborhood? And I was like, this is a lot more work.
It is a lot of work. One of the hardest workouts I've ever done, honestly. Burns. And it hurts to fall down.
The holiday season is just around the corner, and we're all looking for ways to spend and stress less. HelloFresh makes mealtime nearly hassle-free with delicious, home-delivered, chef-crafted recipes that come together quick and are less expensive than takeout. Easily customized recipes so each meal is just the way you like it. There are always options available to trade or upgrade proteins or swap out side dishes even. HelloFresh saves me so much mental energy. No more thinking about what I want to eat, planning, the shopping, the prep. It's all done for me. My current favorite right now is their avocado and pineapple salsa breakfast toast. So yummy. I love that they have breakfast as well as dinners. It's no wonder that HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Get 10 free meals at HelloFresh.com/freeMSN. Apply it across 7 boxes. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's 10 free HelloFresh meals. Just go to HelloFresh.com/freeMSN. In those moments where money isn't moving as fast as your dreams are, Earnin provides the financial momentum you need to keep moving forward. Earnin is an app that gives you access to your pay as you work, up to $100 per day or up to $750 per pay period. Just download the Earnin app and verify your paycheck. Then access up to $100 a day as you work and leave an optional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. You can use Earnin to pay for things like early holiday gifts, a personal growth retreat, an unexpected trip to the vet, or maybe a sudden expense with one of your kids. Make Earnin a part of your financial routine and join Earnin's over 3.5 million customers who say things like, when I think about Earnin, I think about financial stability, security. It gives me a lot of peace of mind. Download Earnin today, spelled EARNIN in the Google Play or Apple App Store. When you download the Earnin app, type in noise under podcast. When you sign up, it really helps the show. Noise under podcast. Subject to your available earnings, location daily max, and pay period max. See earnin.com/TOS for details. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
So now you're a life coach. You talk a lot about women's empowerment. How did you get into this kind of work?
Well, I've always been like the consummate cheerleader. I have an outgoing personality. I'm, if you need a hype girl, I've always been that person. And I started out 100 years ago. I started out actually in the fashion merchandising industry. I worked in a couple of different careers for that, and then ended up going back to school, getting my degree in exercise physiology, and was in the fitness industry, which is sort of, adjacent to life coaching. And just, I've always been interested in wellness in general. And my personal training clients would come to me, and it's like a hairdresser, like they tell us like what's going on in their life. And I noticed that a lot of my clients really struggled with their self-confidence and just like wanting to commit to these bigger goals that were beyond their fitness goals that they just had all these excuses for, or, came down to like a lot of worthiness issues. And like I mentioned, self-confidence, which is what brought me to life coaching, because I felt like fitness wasn't enough. Like fitness was just sort of the doorway to that. And so that's when I went and got my certification. I had no idea what it would bring me. Here I am 3 books later, writing my 4th, success beyond my wildest dreams, honestly, and like getting certified in shame work. Like, are you kidding? Like, if you would have asked me that 15, 20 years ago, I would have laughed hysterically that I would be interested in that type of work. But it's really brought me to my knees, to be frank with you, from a personal growth standpoint, and also an entrepreneurship standpoint. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. I feel like it's where my talent and strength lies. And sometimes I shake my fist at the sky and say, like, couldn't I have just like stayed a personal trainer? I feel like it would have been so much easier on my heart and my stress level. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here, for the sake of telling a dramatic story, which I love to do.
Well, let's talk about shame then. I mean, we learned about it from the work of Brene Brown, and so many of us deal with it. Why is it so toxic? How does it affect our parenting? How does it affect our relationships?
Yeah. And, speaking of Brene Brown, I went and got certified in her work in 2014 and have never looked back. I'm obsessed with getting to the root of the problem. And for most of us, this is it. We all have shame, but we don't talk about it. I feel like, enough. The only people that don't experience shame are psychopaths and sociopaths. And really, your question around like, why is it so toxic is because it's one of those experiences that can change behavior on a dime. It works. Mm-hmm. I think probably every person listening has an experience where they have either been shamed on purpose by someone, a teacher, a parent, someone else, or accidentally shamed. So they kind of walk into a situation that's shaming, and it's really by no fault of someone else. It wasn't done intentionally. Either way, it can make you behave in ways that you're not proud of. You know, a lot of people fight shame with shame. They'll throw it back. Or people isolate and they just completely go inward. They won't show up to different events. They'll stop, relationships because of it, or they will go overboard in terms of people pleasing, quote unquote, brown nosing. Those are kind of like the three main sort of reactions that we have to shame. But I think everyone here listening can think of an experience, especially in childhood, where it has changed us not for the better. And again, it's one of those things that it can be a great motivator, not in a great way, just in terms of because it can change behavior on a dime. However, the long-term effects can be incredibly destructive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could see that. I mean, I think I don't know, thinking back to, my childhood, like one of the things that like my family, because I was so outgoing, and so I was so highly sensitive, but also like very loud, and I would say everything a lot, and so that I was shamed for being annoying, as a kid, and by my family. And man, that is so deep. If I'm worried, if that comes up, that whole are you annoying people? It's a trigger. Ooh, you could just feel that so right in the center.
Yeah.
Right in the center.
Well, and I want to pause on that because that's what shame does. And we call shame a full contact emotion. It's a full contact experience. You feel it in your body. And that's part of the work that I do when I take people through this work is what can be helpful. And I might be jumping ahead here. What can be helpful is for you to understand and get intimate with how shame feels in your body. And not so that you can get rid of it. We can't. It's a universal experience. You will experience it again at some point. I'm sorry. But the faster you can understand that it's happening in your body and to you and why it's happening. So for you, I would take you through an exercise where we talk more about those triggers, about, because you don't want to be perceived as annoying. We all have ways of that we don't want to be perceived. We all have ways that ideally we want to be perceived too. In different areas of your life, they can look different. So I get excited talking about the how, when, why, where of how to establish and learn shame resilience, because it's not about getting rid of it. It's learning how to become resilient to it.
Yeah. So we all have it. A lot of it really stems from childhood, and where we're wanting to sort of look at it to understand it. What are some of the most common shame triggers that people have?
So for women, they're gender specific, and I'll talk about men and women. So for women, it tends to be around our body and appearance. Tends to be number one. And, I don't think anybody can argue that we live in a culture that is beauty and youth obsessed. And girls learn at a fairly young age where our value is. And it is, how we show up, the shape of our bodies, depending on culture, et cetera. For men, a lot of times it's based on their masculinity and how they show up in the world in that regard. And then, when they get older, it's things like, their financial stability, their status, and also, partnerships and things like that. Whether you get partnered or not. A lot of it's cultural, how we decided as a culture and as a society, what is better than the other. And so those are the sort of the more obvious ones. And I also want to make the distinction too, is that shame is rooted in connection versus disconnection. So when you feel like you are kind of going along with the, going with the flow, and you are showing up as like traditional beauty standards here in the US and the West, and then we will most likely feel more connected to people.
Mm-hmm.
When we don't feel that way, we feel disconnected. And that's where like the impact happens in our bodies, like the feeling, because like as humans, we are meant to be connected. They say that, like trauma is created in relationships and it's also healed in relationships as well. And so, we're meant to be connected with each other, and we will die without it. We will literally die without connection. So it's a very real thing. And I believe that this is why, I'm sure that the research says this is why it's a full body experience that we have. Like our body is trying to tell us something. Like when we are feeling disconnected and when we are feeling shame, we feel it viscerally in our bodies.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if we kind of look back at the roots of it, it's like we are the most socially connected primates ever to exist. We're like the ants of the primate world, where all of everything, where we've gotten to this point where we're dominating the earth is because of our cooperation and our connection. So yeah, it becomes like the most important thing. And so we want to stay in the in-group. Except the problem is that in-group is so big. It's like just way too big for us. Like way more than like what 100 people would be in like a hunter-gatherer.
Exactly. It's a lot of boxes to check off.
Yeah. Yeah. And then some groups are like pride you for being, against the establishment. It's very confusing. Well, how do we know when shame is running this show?
Sometimes they're more obvious, like when we know we're in a shaming situation. If you get reprimanded at work in front of a lot of people, that's a more obvious situation. However, I typically don't talk about and teach shame from that regard. My second book is all about this, and it's called How to Stop Feeling Like SHIT. I don't know if I can cuss on your show, but and it's 14 Habits That Are Holding You Back from Happiness. And I don't love the subtitle, by the way, everybody, publishers, but it's these behaviors that we do that are very common. So it's things like people pleasing, isolating, numbing out, perfectionism, blaming, control, caring too much what other people think, like those types of behaviors that we do in order to try to avoid shame. So I joke that perfectionism and control got me to graduate with honors from college. And it was because, I didn't want the shame. This was all unconscious. I didn't want the shame of flunking out because I'd flunked out of junior college a few years prior. So I knew that shame. So I didn't want it. And so again, it's not about not doing the behaviors. It's about knowing when you're in these poor coping mechanisms so that you can try to course correct. But when we are doing any of these behaviors, the isolating, the numbing out, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, shame is running the show. Because I haven't met anyone, client or otherwise, who comes to me and we always talk about values, like what's important about the way that you live your life. Never one of them has said perfectionism, numbing out, isolating instead of connecting, blaming others. Like, no, nobody does. It's things like courage and authenticity and creativity and connection and personal growth. Like, do you see how the disconnect happens?
I do, but yeah, I mean, the like people pleasing could be, is kind of like the dark side of connection in some way. Like they're almost like the same thing. It's like kind of like something gone to an extreme, right?
Exactly.
Like, I'm struggling right now because my dear friend, her father died and they're having a memorial for him. And she has told me about this date and wants me to go to this event. And it's a 2.5 hour drive away that we have to drive there 2.5 hours and then have to drive back 2.5 hours. And so for a person from two very small states, that's like a lot of driving for me. But I've been like kind of flipping back and forth, but I'm gonna be going and doing all this driving because I love my friend. I want to be there for her. But is that people pleasing? I don't know. Like, how does one tell? What is that? What are those things, right?
I think for that particular example, and thank you for bringing that up. That's a great example. In my opinion, in my professional opinion, it would be people pleasing if you feel like a boundary, whether the boundary's been established or not, has been crossed. So say, for instance, because that's a fairly big ask, to have somebody come out for one day, 5+ hours of driving with you probably having to stop and things like that. If the person would have said, can you also bring a cake and a veggie tray, and can you come early to help me set up? Like, I can see for people that can't see Hunter's face, like cringing right now. So basically you've already set a boundary in your mind of like, you're going to come to the memorial and you're going to come home. You're going to show up for your friend. So when you are going above and beyond that boundary, if you are either volunteering because you think that you should to be a good friend, even though you don't want to, or you're saying yes if they ask you to do those extras, that would be people pleasing.
And that is most often rooted in
poor boundaries.
Poor boundaries, wanting to
avoid shame.
Wanting to avoid shame. Okay. All right. So let's then talk about shame resilience. How do we avoid getting stuck by shame? How do I avoid getting stuck by oh my God, they'll think I'm annoying.
Okay.
Help me. Andrea.
Yes, I would. Okay, I would love to. We can use that example, and I'm so glad that you asked it in the way that you did, and I want to underscore that because you said, "How can we avoid getting stuck?" That's the key. So I'm going to say this until the cows come home. We cannot avoid having shame altogether, but we can avoid being stuck in it and making our decisions from that place. Because I think all of us, whether you know it or not, you have made a decision from shame. You have gone overboard. So let's use the example of you and your friend. The effort to avoid shame would be that you don't want to be perceived as a bad friend. And especially this tends to be gender specific for women in that we grow up in a culture where we're taught that other people's comfort needs to come before our own. We are, we never rock the boat. We don't want to inconvenience anyone. It's, kind of gone over the edge of just being nurturing and taking care of people. Like we many times take it to the extreme. Like selfless is the only way to be. Anything else is selfish. Like that's what we're trying to avoid. So if we're talking about the steps of shame resilience, and there's a handful of steps, I want to use the one that you mentioned about how you don't want to, your trigger is around being annoying. So the first thing that we need to do is to understand, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, what happens to our bodies, like knowing that we are in it, because you got to name it to tame it. If you don't know what's happening, you're just going to walk around and, go about your usual self and you don't know. And that's when bad things can happen. So you have to, and what I do when I work with clients is we have this whole thing that we go through, like physiologically, like what happens in your body. For most people, like, do you know what happens to your body? Like if you're in shame, if that happens?
Yes.
What are the symptoms?
It's like, it's in the pit at the bottom, base of my neck, deep in my throat is a very uncomfortable, tickly pit feeling, right? There at like the top of my heart, base of my throat. That's where I feel it.
Interesting. Yeah. So mine is more, I feel really hot all of a sudden. Like I can feel myself flushing and I get tunnel vision. If it's really bad, I'll get tunnel vision. Like everything starts to slow down. I also sometimes my armpits tingle, which is not that uncommon. Yeah. You have to know what your own physiological symptoms are. For most people, it's like somewhere in their torso, either stomach, chest, or throat, somewhere in there, or all of those things. So first is knowing what happens to you physiologically, and then understanding why you're in it. So this goes back to when we talked about the triggers. So I take people through an exercise where we talk about it's called ideal and unwanted identities. So one of your unwanted identities is you don't want to be perceived by other people as being annoying. As parents, we have ideal and unwanted identities that we want to be seen as and don't want to be seen as if we are partnered. So as a mother, you probably have ways that you want to be perceived by your husband in ways that you would never want to be perceived as a mother specifically.
For example,
For example, well, you tell me, like, how do you want to be? Like, if you overheard him talking about you and it was amazing, what would you want him to be saying specifically about your parenting?
I mean, I would want to say she really listens and is there and is, really connected to the girls. That's what I would want him to say.
And then how would you never want to be perceived by him as a parent?
Oh, I don't know, super angry, or, kind of the extremes of like either angry or, just like annoying and placating.
Yeah. And when I work with clients and I have more time, we look at all the areas of their life.
Sure.
Work, in partnerships, in your friendships, as a community member. And we make lists of them because, again, like, I want you to get intimate with how this is showing up in your life.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like, really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at Aruba.com.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Prep for Thanksgiving at Whole Foods Market. Save now on no antibiotics ever frozen whole turkey. Just $1.49 a pound with Prime. Sales on brie and select seafood appetizers help get things started. For sides, go with wallet-happy favorites from 365 by Whole Foods Market. And finish with decadent desserts from the bakery. Or get your whole spread catered. Just order early. Get Thanksgiving ready at Whole Foods Market. Terms apply.
The kind of cruddy thing is that we have no control however other people perceive us. Like, we have very little control, if any. And we're going to make mistakes. Like, you're going to have moments where you get angry. And you're not proud of how you showed up. So what then ends up happening is that for most of us, we go in this cycle of trying to, when we are perceived as one of our unwanted identities, when we're perceived as annoying or when we're perceived as angry by other people, what usually ends up happening is that we try harder to get to our ideal identities. So this is where the people pleasing starts. This is where the perfectionism starts. So you might, so for example, if you make a mistake at work and people notice, if you drop the ball on a project or something like that, what a lot of people might do is start working a lot of overtime, coming in early, making sure everybody knows that you're taking on extra work. You are, crossing boundaries, you're doing things that you don't want to do in order to kind of make up for this mistake that you made, trying to avoid shame. And really the where the resilience is, and this is the, going on to the next step, is two main things. And the research shows that self-compassion, which is something that we give ourselves, we are speaking to ourselves with kindness, we are giving ourselves grace, we are letting ourselves off the hook, forgiving ourselves. That's self-kindness. And then the second piece is empathy. And we get empathy from other people. We can't do that by ourselves. So that's where, if anyone's listening who's familiar with Brene Brown's work, she says, we tell people who've earned the right to hear our story. We tell our shame stories to people who've earned the right to hear them. And our hope is that you are met with empathy. And this is typically a skill that is learned, not something that we know how to do. I think especially if you were raised in our generation, we probably weren't modeled that growing up with, like parents with a lot of empathy and compassion. So it is a skill that we have to learn. It's acknowledging someone else's stuff like if I come to you as a friend and say, Hunter, I made the biggest mistake at work. I was just mortified by it. I missed an important client meeting and now everybody knows it and I don't know what to do. So for you to empathize with me, you would say,
oh my God.
Dang. Yeah. Tell me, how would you empathize?
Stinks. That must feel terrible. I'm so sorry. That must feel really hard.
Yeah. Thank you. A+. But what a lot of times what people do is they might be, like, oh, it's not that bad, or, oh, everybody loves you, you're fine, or how could you
dismissing,
be so careless, or, like we've all been, in those situations that we weren't met with empathy. But that is sort of the crash course 5-minute, 10-minute version of what shame resilience looks like. I give, when I teach it, I give a lot more examples and more engagement with people and more examples, but it takes practice. It takes a lot of practice, but it can change your life, really. And especially like when you can teach it to your kids.
Yeah, that's what was going to be my next question. But I mean, this is so affirming for me to hear, because in mindful parenting, module 3 is all about self-compassion, and module 4 is all about reflective listening, empathetic listening. So how do we do this? Like if we, we can understand, obviously we don't love that we're going to like feel shame again in the future. We don't love being driven by shame. We can practice to make ourselves more resilient and cope better. But how can we help our kids to avoid being driven by shame, to avoid some of this in the future, maybe a percentage of it?
Yeah. I think depending on age, let me back up. So when my kids were in elementary school, I started talking to them. There was two specific things that I did fairly young. And it doesn't matter if your kids are older, you can still talk to them about this. This is one of the things that I very intentionally and consciously wanted to have different for my kids than what I got, is I told them over and over again, your feelings are never wrong. Your feelings are never wrong. Whatever you're feeling is right for you. What you are responsible for is your behavior that comes from those feelings. So I always told them, like, you're allowed to be angry with me. What I won't tolerate is name calling, being nasty, slamming doors, like, whatever the boundaries are in your house. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted them to grow up to know that their feelings were okay, because I think so many of us grow up not being like feeling wrong for our emotions, being told we're wrong for our emotions, being told how we should feel, being told how we shouldn't feel, being dismissed, not being seen in our emotions. And that can create long lasting emotional problems and, it can bleed into our relationships, et cetera. So there was that piece. And then also what I started to notice in elementary school is when my kids would have a long day at school and be overstimulated and get in the car and, and of course tell me like the rotten things that happened that day, I did my best to meet them with empathy instead of, especially if they told me like some kid was messing with them, like, I'm like, who are their parents? That's like, but like first empathize. Sometimes I would tell them an anecdote like that I remember from elementary school and that happening to me, just to be able to let them know they're not alone in what they're feeling and experiencing, and just let them talk it out. And exactly like the example that you gave, like that sounds like a rough day, kiddo. Like, man, that I wish that I would have been there to be able to give you a hug. Can I give you a hug now? Just those are the two main things that I tried my best to teach them. Like, did it always land? Probably not. But, did it land some of the time and be helpful? I think so. I hope so. Yeah. So those are like the two big things.
Yeah. That I see you. I hear you. I'm acknowledging your hurt. I'm acknowledging your feelings. I'm acknowledging what you said to me and that was hard. That piece about acknowledgement, like, it's so hard because the feelings are so uncomfortable that we just want to make it better. It comes from like a good place in some ways, but like we all just need that piece of like, oh, you really see me, you really hear me, it just is incredibly healing to be seen, to be heard, have someone be really present with you.
and to be understood. Like I want to pause there because what you said was so important and profound. I don't think that ever ends for us as human beings as we get older, but I think it can be incredibly impactful if we teach our children from a young age that we are safe, that we are a soft and safe place to land, because then they are more likely to come to us with big things like, drugs and alcohol or sex or, just whatever these big things that happen that come up in the, in the tween and teen years and into young adulthood. If we already have that foundation and established, and I don't think it's too late. I think that if your kids are older, what I would recommend is having a very transparent conversation and saying like, what I wish that I would have done more when you were younger is this, when you map it out, and I'm trying to do better. And I hope that you give me an opportunity as your parent to do better. And here's what I'm going to, do you know what I mean? Like, I just, there's so much to be said for transparency and just owning and taking responsibility for mistakes that we've made as parents and trying to do better. And that is like one of the most vulnerable things I think we can do.
Yeah. But it's so lovely to open up that depth of humanity to our kids and in an authentic way. And they really, I think kids really respond to us when we are being really authentic rather than defensive or posturing or whatever, these sort of habitual things that are that we do. Oh my goodness. So we've talked about shame, resilience, all of these things, but what is this? You say that this idea of giving 0 Fs is actually harming us.
Right.
Can you just let us, what's up with that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I wrote that chapter and this was like in 2016, 2017, where I think that meme of like, she gave 0 X and lived 0 Fs and lived happily ever after. It was a meme that was super popular and, it was on t-shirts and
it's had some life. Yeah.
It definitely like took off. And I think it's toxic. I think so many personal development things have been miniaturized for social media and Pinterest and things like that. But that one in particular, I wanted to write an entire chapter about because I work with a lot of people who either, a lot of them are people pleasers. They struggle with boundaries, as many of us do. And so they think that they need to go all the way, that the pendulum needs to swing all the way over, that they don't care at all about what other people think. And this is an impossible goal. We are humans. We've established in this conversation that we are meant for connection. And so what I encourage people to do is get very clear on like, where are the medium Fs? Like, care about the right things. Care about the opinions of the right people in your life. And sometimes it's not your mom. Like, I'm assuming like the opinions of your children matter to you. I'm assuming the opinions of your partner or maybe a mentor or a close friend, like those are the people. Like, get clear on like why their opinion matters, but it does not have to be black or white, one or the other. And yeah, it's just, that's basically it. Just no one cares 0. And if they say that, they're lying. They're probably hurting a lot and need a hug or something like that. But yeah, medium Fs.
Okay. Yeah. I know. But then you think that really ties into what we were saying, because we were talking about like, how you communicate with your kids and stuff like that. And sometimes our attitude, especially with maybe like teen or tweens giving us an attitude, is that I give 0 Fs about what you're, but we actually do care that they have given us an attitude and what they're saying. And, and in those moments, it's like, we actually have to show the underlying of like, hey, when you talk to me like that, it kind of hurts. Yeah. I give 0 Fs and you can't hurt me kind of thing. Right. Like, I love that. I love that your answer is like, this is not about caring about everybody. It's not about caring about nobody. It's about the middle path. We are interconnected human beings. And of course we care about each other. And of course that happens.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It doesn't need to be strangers on the internet, but it could be, the people that are closest to you that you care about.
Andrea, tell the listener about your podcast. And of course you can find, if you want to talk to Andrea more about shame resilience, you can find her at andreaowen.com. But you also have a good podcast with amazing guests on.
It is mostly, I know there's a lot of men listening, but it is mostly a women's empowerment show. Although I do have some male clients for sure. I have walked many a man through shame resilience or other kind of coaching, but it's called Make Some Noise with Andrea Owen, and you've been a guest. So definitely check that out. And I'm at Hey Andrea Owen on all the social channels.
Andrea, this has been such a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you. I loved coming and talking to you on your podcast. I really appreciate this conversation about shame and all the work you've done with it. Thanks for indulging me and talking to me about roller derby. I love that.
My pleasure.
So awesome. Yes, like go forth and roll that shame right out the door.
I love that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thanks everyone for listening. I'm grateful for everyone's time.
Hey, did you know there's free secret podcast episodes waiting for you that are not part of my regular podcast feed? Yes, AndreaOwen.com/free. And you just sign up. You get a link sent to you. It's very secret. It's like a secret club. We don't have a secret handshake. Don't worry about that. But it's these motivating podcast episodes that I made for you. They're under 20 minutes each. There's 3 of them. They're for wherever you are in your life. So head on over there and grab them. They range from really supporting you and seeing you where you are and being compassionate, all the way to giving you a giant kick in your ass and telling you how amazing and gorgeous and phenomenal you are. So AndreaOwen.com/free and get your hands on that free podcast feed.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable, tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.